Testing. This is a very important alert. Please listen to the entire report and then share it with your friends. I want you to imagine for a moment what would go through your mind if the United States Department of Homeland Security suddenly announced that in just 48 hours from now, over 1/3 of all of the people in America are going to be put through mandatory emergency defense training, and that the training will include emergency rescue drills, fire responses, community evacuations to underground bunkers and bomb shelters, and the deployment of millions of pieces of personal protective equipment. It would sound like something out of a movie, wouldn't it? But think about it. If you really knew that this was happening in America, if it was true, wouldn't it make you think that something big is going on that the government knows about for this to come about so suddenly? Well, this is really happening, folks, but it's happening in Russia. Just over 24 hours ago, the Russian Emergency Situations Ministry announced that it's putting more than 40 million citizens through a massive civil defense training that begins October 4th and runs through the 7th. It includes cooperation with the Russian military. It includes nearly 250,000 emergency professionals and more than 50,000 rescue units. The official Russian government website for emergency communications management is called EMERCOM. EMERCOM says that the exercise consists of 3 stages. Stage 1. In this stage, they're going to practice notification and gathering of senior officials of both federal and regional executive authorities. So they're going to gather local government officials, civil defense forces. They're going to practice the deployment of civil defense management systems on all levels, readying civil defense communications and notification systems. Then it moves to stage 2, which is planning and organization of civil defense actions. They're going to be deploying a team of civil defense forces and facilities designed to respond to massive scale disasters and fires. Then it moves into stage 3. Part of the drill includes mobilizing millions of Russians and directing them into nuclear bomb bunkers in Moscow. The deputy head of EMERCOM in Moscow, whose name is Andrei Mishenko, said that the capital city has enough underground bunkers now ready for all 11 million of its inhabitants. So, what is all this about? Why are tens of millions of Russians all across the nation suddenly being pulled into drills for a major disaster such as a potential nuclear war? I'll summarize it for you, and you won't hear any of this from our own Orwellian Ministry of Truth, otherwise known as our government-controlled mainstream media. So listen. The United States of America has been prodding the sleeping bear known as Russia, and the bear has finally awoken to defend itself. Going back to 9/11, the USA began a series of military conquests throughout the Middle East for the conscious purpose of destabilizing the region so that they could gain control over it. But this has been happening right in Russia's backyard. The worst provocations took place in Syria. This started around 2011, 2012, the beginning of the Arab Spring, where the American CIA stirred up terrorist groups and have been directing them in an assault against the government of Syria in order to try and overthrow it. Now, all of this violence has led to the creation of ISIS. So when Russia got involved in 2014 to try and hedge the U.S. efforts to overthrow the Syrian government, the USA didn't take it lightly. They responded by instigating a CIA-backed coup in Ukraine, 2013-2014. They instigated a coup that overthrew the pro-Russian government. And Ukraine is right there on the border of Russia. America then installed a pro-Western government that consistently votes against Russia, leading the country into a state of civil war, which is continuing to this day. The Western coalition that was led by the USA used this event as justification to further punish Russia. Barack Obama called on a coalition of nations, mostly Western nations, to begin a fierce economic war against Russia. They used sanctions, among other things. They called on Saudi Arabia to open its oil spigots to flood the global oil market with cheap oil. That's why gas prices dropped so low about a year and a half ago. Okay, this was a concerted plan. This was a plan to damage the economy of Russia, because over half of Russia's economy comes from its own sale of oil. They're an oil-rich nation. And so the combination of all of these sanctions, along with the suppressed oil prices, destabilized the Russian currency, the ruble, and it caused their economy to plummet. It also resulted in the complete collapse of the economy of Venezuela, down in South America, which is an ally of Russia. And just like Russia, their economy relies on oil sales, actually much more so. So with Russia on the ropes, the USA said, hey, we can resume our push to overthrow the Syrian government using these terrorist groups and moderate rebel mercenary forces. And so in September of 2014, Barack Obama began sending U.S. warships to the region. And since then, American fighter jets have been flying over Syrian skies to help the rebels against the actual army there, the Syrian army. But this is Vladimir Putin we're talking about. This is not the Soviet Union in its waning years. This is a nation that is on the ascent, led by a very determined man, Vladimir Putin. He sent in his own military forces into Syria. Unlike the USA, Russia was invited into Syria by the president, Bashar al-Assad. And so for the last year, the USA and Russia have been fighting a fierce war for strategic control of the region, using proxies for the majority of the fighting. They're working through these various factions to conduct the war. It's much like the Korean War. You know, the USA against China essentially is what it was. But there in Syria, over a dozen other nations have now joined in the fight. And that puts us into the early stages of what is clearly World War III. Over this time, several times, Vladimir Putin has told the world what is happening in Syria. He has explained why Russia feels that it has to defend its interest against this continuing U.S. neo-imperialism that has set the entire Middle East and North Africa on fire. But here in the West, our media outlets keep blacking out Putin's speeches. Our people never hear about this stuff. But Putin has said several times that the United States is pushing this conflict headlong toward nuclear war. And Putin himself has vowed that he will not back down against the United States, because if he does, it spells the end of Russia. They will be contained, and they will cease to be anything close to a first world nation. And so he has said that he is prepared to use nuclear arms against us if we keep pushing this. Things have come to a critical juncture. Russia and Syrian forces have largely succeeded in retaking the key city of Aleppo in Syria. The U.S. had masterminded, using CIA operatives, we had masterminded a plan to help these U.S.-backed terrorist groups that Obama calls moderate rebels, as well as helping to coordinate with ISIS to take the city of Aleppo. It's the biggest city in Syria. Just last week, Russia struck a secret compound on the outskirts of Aleppo, and it killed dozens of CIA and Israeli Mossad agents. These are the people that have been directing the rebel forces in that area of Aleppo. And so in response to that, I saw this come out in the news. I thought, oh my gosh, what happened in secret for the U.S. to suddenly start talking about imposing a no-fly zone over Syria? But that's what they did. This last week, the U.S. government started saying, we're going to impose a no-fly zone. When that happens, that means that if a Russian jet enters the airspace, the United States will shoot down their jets. That is an act of war. The problem is Russian jets are over the skies of Aleppo and elsewhere in Syria already. They were there at the request of the Syrian president. And they have engaged the U.S. They have not shot each other yet, but Russian and U.S. jets have been streaking past each other using very dangerous maneuvers. Some of the Air Force reports have said that Russian jets have come within as little as 10 feet of U.S. aircraft. Adding to all of this tension, today the U.S. State Department has announced that it has cut off diplomatic contact with Russia over the ongoing events in Aleppo. Folks, this is big. This is huge. Seeing that the USA is not backing down and knowing the evil intents of the wicked New World Order thugs who keep pushing America toward nuclear war with Russia, what the Russian government has begun doing is preparing its citizens for what looks to be like an unavoidable war with the United States. And so that is what this massive drill is about. It is getting their people ready for the potential for nuclear war or some other form of warfare with the U.S. Guys, if this news doesn't scare you, you must not believe this report to be true. If that's true, some of the videos that I'm going to include at the end of this episode so that you can educate yourselves on the seriousness of this situation. I've been following this story for years and reporting on it. This is big. I've got 4 sons who are all currently draft age. So it's my mission to warn the public about the terrible events that are taking place right now. Events that the U.S. media are hiding from the public. So I want you to do your own research. You'll find out that what I'm saying is absolutely true. For the sake of my children, I'm speaking out against U.S. imperialism in the Middle East. We don't need to be over there. We've got our own problems here at home. We don't need to be trying to police the Middle East and getting involved in every last squabble that's going on over there. It is unconstitutional, it is immoral, and it's downright dangerous. So think for yourself, what is your reason for opposing U.S. intervention in the Middle East? I want you to decide that for yourself, because after you have figured that out, I want you to go and warn all of your friends and family. I want you to wake them up. We need to wake everyone up, all of our people, to the horrifying reality that our world is teetering on the edge of the abyss from which there can be no return. I'm Jake Morphonios, and this is the End Times News Report.